Welcome to Glass Houses, a Billy Joel podcast. I'm Michael Grosvenor.
And I'm Jack Fernino. Join us as we dig deep into Billy Joel's songs and history and what his music has meant to us.
The audience reaction was phenomenal. I didn't know what the reaction was going to be. I didn't even know how much of my music that they knew. I didn't know if they knew any of my music. I had never played in Cuba.
Hello, Cuba.
So it was all a big experiment to me. I had no idea. It was a surprise to me. I went on last.
Estados Unidos, Billy Joel.
So I go on stage and
No hablo español. Hablo un poquito español.
And then right into Big Shot. The crowd goes nuts. I went right up to the edge of the stage, which is what we wanted. We wanted to be a little subversive.
Good night, Cuban. Don't take any shit from anybody.
Spread over 3 days in Cuba, the Havana Jam 79 features Columbia recording artists alongside native musicians and bands. It was a monumental, historic event that hardly anyone knows about anymore.
But Ernesto Juan knows the story, and he's been trying to tell it for the past decade.
The Cuban-born journalist, documentarian, and translator became engrossed with the festival around the time of its 30th anniversary in 2009. Since then, he's been collecting interviews and footage with plans to release a feature-length film about the event.
He's also spoken at length with one of the concert's biggest names, Billy Joel. And Ernesto has near-exclusive audio recordings of the performance that hardly anyone knew existed.
Right before Billy and the band took the stage, Elizabeth Joel, Billy's wife and manager at the time, ordered Columbia Records personnel to turn off the audio and visual recording. But 2 bootleg copies exist, and both found their way to Ernesto.
Since then, he's been flying all over the world gathering more first-hand accounts and documents from an unprecedented 3 days of performances by American recording artists in communist Cuba.
But the story goes well beyond the concert. In our own interview, Ernesto also talks about how Western music was villainized by Fidel Castro and his followers, but sought out by many others. He gives his perspective and memories of his homeland, along with long-forgotten lore about the Havana Jam and striking up a friendship with Billy Joel.
In this special episode of Glass Houses, a Billy Joel podcast, Ernesto Juan joins us as we dig deep into Havana Jam 79 and what life was like decades ago in Cuba. This was such an amazing conversation. The documentary has been a passion project of Ernesto's for over a decade now, and I am really hoping that this is the year that it all comes to fruition.
It's an important story that really needs to be told. I'd been familiar with this project for a while. It got me thinking about how much music is the language that connects us all. It's the universal language that, even though our dialect, our spoken language may not be similar, we can all identify with a melody and a beat and a groove. In the height of the bad relations between nations, you had American and Cuban acts coming together to play music for people. And at the end of the day, that's all musicians want to do, is play for people.
And that's the story that Ernesto's telling here. If you're familiar with the story of Billy Joel going to Russia, this is the prequel to that, because so much of what we learned about what happened in Russia happened in Cuba a decade or so before. And it's such a shame that this entire concert, this entire festival has been swept under the rug. Liberty DeVito mentions it a little in his book, but the information we got from Ernesto about the concert and about the environment around it was so illuminating and so exciting that I think we just need to jump right into it.
So without further ado, let's jump into our conversation about Havana Jam 1979 with Ernesto Juan.
I remember reading your first post where you mentioned that you had this footage, and I was really excited to learn more about it. And this is footage that you shot yourself?
No, I didn't attend the Havana Jam Festival. In 1979, that festival was very private, very, it was an invitation event only. I only heard about it like probably a year later.
When you said you heard about it, like you didn't know that the event had occurred, or that you just knew that the footage was out there a year later?
Well, as a matter of fact, I heard many years later that Billy Joel had also been part of this Havana Jam Festival.
Oh, wow. You have the audio. Why is there no video footage?
There is not even audio of the event officially. This thing was organized by Columbia Records, by Bruce Lumbaugh, who was then the president of Columbia Records. And of course, when they started organizing this in 1978, and then when it happened in 1979, Billy Joel was the biggest act for Columbia Records. So he was going to be, of course, the highlight. It was, he closed the event on the third day. It was 3 days, and they invited a number of different musicians, from jazz musicians to salsa, including the Funny All Stars, and Billy Joel, and Rita Coolidge, who was not part of Columbia Records, but Chris Christopherson, who was then her husband, was part of the Columbia Records roster, and Stephen Stills, and Weather Report, and all these jazzes and stuff. So Billy Joel was supposed to be the highlight of the whole event. They thought of the idea of producing a documentary for the event to sell to any American radio station and American TV station who could be interested in broadcasting the event. They could make more money through all this, selling the documentary on TV. And the day of the event, I don't know whether the musicians knew that it was the whole event was going to be recorded and videotaped. I believe they did, because every single day there was a TV crew filming everything that was going on, not even at the festival, but also at the hotel. So there was a crew, so they knew. But the day of the event, right before Billy Joel was supposed to hit the stage, Elizabeth, who was then his wife slash manager, decided that no, it was a no-go. So he asked the TV crew to turn the heads of the cameras up and just turn them around 180 degrees, and he pulled the plug. So she didn't allow that the cameras even had power. And he went to the sound desk and he told Billy Joel's sound guys, no recording. Billy Joel didn't know this. He didn't know that Elizabeth was going to make that decision. So that's why there is no audio officially, and there is no video. He was the only act that was not videotaped. Being a Cuban, I had two friends who went, both were journalists, but one went independently, and he took a cassette tape recorder, and he was sitting on the first balcony. So he recorded from the first balcony the whole show. And also a radio station, a Cuban radio station, probably Columbia Records didn't know that they were recording, and they recorded the show as well. So those are the two sources of Billy Joel playing at the Havana Jam.
And those have been kept really under wraps all these years.
In 2009, I started for the 30th anniversary of the Havana Jam. I started organizing I was a journalist in Cuba at the time. A friend of mine asked me, listen, why don't you write something for the 30th anniversary of the Havana Jam? And I said, yeah, let me think about it. I'm not a big fan of jazz or, the other acts or Cuban acts that were present there. The only one that actually I cared about was Billy Joel. So I said, let me think about it, because I'm not too interested in this. And he said, listen, this was a historical event. It was the first time in 20 years that U.S. musicians and Cuban musicians, shook hands and shared the stage. So think about it. And I said, okay, maybe I will do something. I will interview Chucho Valdez, Cuban star. I mean, he's a piano player, and he was part of the Irakere band. Irakere was a band that was jazz, African, Cuban jazz, that sort of music, avant-garde jazz. So I said, I'm going to interview Chucho Valdez, and I'm going to ask him what he thinks about the Havana Jam. And the interview was so good that then I said, this is not going to be written on a piece of, on a newspaper. So I'm going to ask a friend to lend me a camera. So I borrowed a camera, microphones, and I started interviewing people, including Chucho Valdez again. Then a friend of mine said, I have a friend who has a friend who has a friend who has a copy of Billy Joel's concert. So I said, wait, are you sure? He says, yeah, I have everything. So I started, researching, and I got a copy of I had a copy at the time of the two albums that Columbia Records released, and Billy Joel was not on them. So I started researching, and they told me because Billy Joel didn't allow his act to be recorded. So I said, I have a gold mine in my hands. This is something not only because it hasn't been released before, but because it's Billy Joel in Cuba.
Right.
So I have two different sources. One which is like listening to the Beatles at the Star Club in Hamburg. I don't know whether you have heard that tape. Something
I have
like
that
that
on record, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
something like that. And the other one is
Yeah.
pretty decent because it was recorded by a radio station on a monotape recorder, but it's a decent recording.
We found some set lists online, and it starts with The Stranger, and Big Shot is the 7th song. However, we noticed that in the trailer you have, in Billy's recollection, he comes on and says, and I go right into Big Shot.
And he told me the same during the interview. Well, actually, what you saw in the trailer, it's the interview. I talked to Billy Joel 2 times before that interview. I told him that the first recording had been The Stranger, and I played him the tape, and he didn't say anything. During the interview, the live interview on camera, he said, and then we went straight into Big Shot, and they gan. Yeah. And I said, but what is he talking about? He already knows that he didn't start with Big Shot. He started with The Stranger. So I said, all right, let me stop you there for a second. Let me stop you. I cannot let you continue because that's not what happened. You started with The Stranger. And he said, did I? And I said, yes, you did. and he says, are you sure? And I said, yes. And then I played him the recording again.
Yeah.
And he says, okay. And I said, can you say that again? But don't say that you started with Big Shot. And then he said, okay. And then we went, well, we sang our first song. He didn't mention the title.
Right.
And he blew it. He didn't. Because he wanted to sound like
Right.
like he started like rocking, and he rocked the audience, and everybody went like, wow. No, he started like in a very mellow. He started in
It's a better story.
As a matter of fact, the whole stage was dark. It was total pitch black, and all of a sudden, a spotlight hits his, and then poof, and then it's Billy Joel sitting in front of the piano. And there is an ashtray with a cigarette, and then you can see the smoke. And then he's whistling the song, and he started in the mellow. He didn't start with Big Shot. No, that's not true. It's like telling Paul McCartney, no, you didn't write Yesterday.
I have the tape. It was Ringo. There's so much more to talk about, but I just wanted to confirm the set list. If I can read it off, do you have the set list with you?
Beginning with The Stranger, Moving Out, Honesty, My Life, Angry Young Man, She's Always a Woman to Me, a Piano Fanfare, Rosalinda's Eyes, Just the Way You Are.
Zanzibar. There is something interesting about Zanzibar that they started playing and the audio guy did something wrong and he gave a horrible feedback. Liberty DeVito had his headphones on and the feedback was right in and he just jumped from the drum set and he said, what the fuck is this? So they started playing it again. So Big Shot was number like 13.
Big Shot after Zanzibar?
Yeah, deep in the set.
Only the good young, yeah. That's it, the next one. Get it right the first time, and that was the last song. And then he did an encore.
Get it right the first time was the encore?
Yeah, that's the last song. So Only the Good Die Young was the last song of the concert. And then he came back on stage and he did an encore. And the best part is the end. Good night, Cuban. Don't take any shit from anybody.
So picking up your story again, you borrowed a camera and you had decided then that this had to be filmed. This wouldn't just be in writing.
Started interviewing all the musicians, Cuban musicians that lived in Cuba at the time. Remember that this is 30 years after the Havana Jam. Some of the people who had been part of the Havana Jam from the Cuban side had already died. So I started interviewing, the Cuban acts, mostly, all of them, all the Cuban acts that were alive.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is 2009. In 2011, I came to live here. I came to live in Miami. I never pretended to interview the American side. It was going to be a Havana Jam with the Cuban people talking about the Havana Jam.
Right.
With no footage whatsoever. I didn't have anything. And there is a trailer. I don't know whether you saw it already. You've seen it already, which is the Cuban version with the Cubans talking about, prohibition. And it was like we had the enemy in our backyard, that sort of thing. So when I came here, I was a little bit frustrated that I haven't been able to finish the Cuban documentary. And a friend of mine told me, again, friends are the ones pulling the strings. And a friend said, why don't you finish the documentary? Now you're in the States, you can interview the American side. And I said, all right, that's interesting. I started a page, a Facebook page for the Havana Jam. I don't remember because this is like 11 years ago. I said something like, I'm a Cuban filmmaker and I'm just putting together a documentary about the Havana Jam. If anybody knows anybody, and then I mentioned a few names, Chris Christopherson, Rita Coolidge, Stephen Stills, the Funny All Stars, Billy Joel. I think I did it like on a weekend. And on the Friday, I got a call on my phone and it said private call. And I answered and it says, hi, this is Billy Joel. Is this Ernesto? And I said, yeah. And it says, I'm Billy Joel. I heard that you want to interview me for the Havana Jam. How can I help? And I started thinking, who of my friends is pulling my leg? Who of my friends is imitating Billy Joel? And I said, okay, yeah, I'd love to interview you. What happened that your recording doesn't exist? And he said, because of my wife, and that's why I'm not married. And I said, this is Billy Joel. This is not a friend pulling my leg. This is Billy Joel. And he says, all right, how can I help? And I said, well, I'd love to interview you. And he says, how do you want to do this? And I said, well, I live in Florida. I live in Miami. So you tell me. And he says, when do you want to do it? And I said, can we do it tomorrow? And he says, no, tomorrow I will be, I'm in West Palm Beach right now. I have to play at the Madison Square Garden tomorrow, Saturday. So maybe when I come back, probably on Tuesday, after I come back, is that all right with you? And I said, is that all right with me? Yes, it's all right with me. So he gave me his number and he gave me a place to meet. After I hung up, I told my wife, you will never guess who just called me. And she said, don't tell me that it was Billy Joel. And I said, yes, it was Billy Joel. He was the first one who called me. We met in a restaurant in West Palm Beach and we talked a little bit about, everything. He started telling me the story that his father had lived in Cuba in 1948. His father went on a ship and they came to Cuba. They couldn't come to the United States because there was a quota. Only a certain amount of Jews were allowed in the States, so they were not allowed in the States, so they went to Cuba. So he lived for 3 or 4 years in Cuba, and he lost his virginity in Cuba. And his father always told him about Cuban girls and how beautiful Cuban girls were and how nice it was to be in Cuba. And he was always attracted to going to Cuba. So when Bruce Lumbaugh told him that this was happening, he said yes. He said he didn't think it twice. He said yes. Mm. So then when he starts telling me that, I just pull out my tape recorder and I start and he says, no. We are going to talk about that later. Let's have lunch here and then we can talk. So we finished talking. What car did you bring? I says, I have a Toyota. I think I had a Toyota Corolla at the time. And I says, bring your car. I'm going to wait for you here in the parking lot. So when we came, it was my wife and I. He was on his motorcycle, going around the parking lot. And he said, follow me. And we followed him all the way for 20 minutes to his house. It's funny because there was a time when I almost hit him from behind.
Oh, wow. Oh, geez.
He almost ran a red light. And I thought he was going to stop. And he continued. And I almost hit him he doesn't know this. I almost hit him from behind. So we went to his house and it was just him and my wife and myself. Nobody else. Wow. So we had a nice chat for about 4 hours talking about everything. I showed him all my documentation about the Havana Jam, the newspapers, and the magazines. The Time magazine. I think it's the Time magazine or Life. I think it's the Time magazine where he's sunbathing and he signed he signed it. I think I posted that photo of him showing the magazine to the camera, the cover of Time.
I think what was it? Maybe People.
I don't remember now. Probably was People. Yes, probably was People.
Yeah, I think it might have been People magazine where he's got the can, he's got the cigar. Yeah.
So then he said, this time we're going to do it on audio because I don't remember, probably I will not remember many things. But next time we're going to do it, on camera. So that was an interview only with audio. Mm-hmm. And we talked about everything. And he told me about his dad. And he said that his dad has studied with Castro in Cuba, with Fidel Castro. They went to the same school. And he told me about Elizabeth not allowing, his act to be recorded, and he was very upset about that with her because she didn't tell him that she was going to do that. She was going to pull the plug. He invited me to see him play at the Madison Square Garden like a few days later. And then we organized, we scheduled the proper, camera interview in West Palm Beach. And we did that. And so that's probably what you saw on the trailer that I published online.
And you said you were a fan of Billy Joel at the time anyway, so it wasn't just historical.
Being Cuban, you would think that all Cubans are a fan of salsa and stuff, but there was a big part of Cuban youth in the late 70s, like myself, that we followed rock music. Mm-hmm. And there were a couple of radio stations from Miami that you could pick very clearly the signal in Havana. On a clear day was like radio FM AM radio stations like WGBS and WQAM, KAAY from Little Rock, Arkansas, WLWY from Key West, and you could hear all these songs like if I was living in Miami. So yes, I followed. I was a big fan of Casey Kasem's American Top 40. Every single weekend, I listened to American Top 40. So I knew who Billy Joel was because he was hitting the charts in 1979 when he came.
Yeah.
So yes, I knew. I mean, even though I don't know his songs from memory, I cannot memorize all his songs. But yes, I like Billy Joel very much.
Right. And I guess this question comes because when Billy went to Russia in the 80s, American and Western pop music had to be bootlegged. There was a real embargo on it. With Cuba at the time, was there American pop music, sort of officially in the country, or was it bootlegged and you had to pick it up off the radio?
No. The main source of income of American music was through radio. The most. There were people who had albums because their parents were either, flight attendants or pilots, or maybe diplomats, and they could travel abroad and bring all these albums. But in Cuba, there was not a like you could go to a record store and buy American music. No, it was very much. I'm not gonna say that in 1979 it was prohibited. It was in the 60s and early 70s. It was totally prohibited. Mm-hmm. If you were caught listening to an American radio station, you could go to jail.
Wow.
It was even worse than Russian. Well, I'm talking about the 80s in Russia, but now we are talking about the 60s and 70s in Cuba. So yes, there was sure. You couldn't buy a record, even though people had them, but you couldn't. It was not common. American music was considered too capitalist and too long hair was considered too extravagant, and Cuba it's a communist country, and Castro at that time had the idea, and he for many years it happened like that everything coming from the United States, even though you were singing love songs. Mm-hmm. They were prohibited. Things like the Beatles, for example, in the 60s, they were prohibited. The Beatles were banned in Cuba for many years. And even though the Beatles were singing "Give Peace a Chance," or John Lennon was singing "Give Peace a Chance," or John Lennon singing "Power to the People," or the Beatles singing "All You Need Is Love," no. And even though they were British, not American, they were singing in English. So everything coming from anywhere in the world in English was prohibited. However, there were many Spanish from Spain, singing like Formula Quintas, singing all these same songs in Spanish. You could listen to them every day on the radio.
Do you think that English music being banned from Cuba, did that inherently give it some more attractiveness that made it exciting?
Of course, everything that is prohibited, it's attractive. I'm not going to say that in 79, we're talking about that prohibition, but the mentality was still the same. And even though at the time they were not selling albums on, American albums in Cuban record stores, but the mentality was still the same. They were playing Billy Joel on the radio, on Cuban radio. They were playing rock music on Cuban radio, but no records were being sold at the time. We didn't have an industry selling American music in Cuba. Well, it was the embargo or the blockade, whatever you want to call it. That there was no trade between Cuba and the United States. However, there were many albums from Billy Joel and Led Zeppelin. I had a couple of those copies from Russian albums because Cuba sent many students, young students, to study at the university in Russia. And all these people, when they came back to Cuba, they brought, the whole collection of Led Zeppelin or the Beatles or Billy Joel in Russian albums. Of course, Billy Joel singing in English, not in Russian, but it was a Russian copy of the album.
Now, would you guys make copies of those? I'm curious, or was it a situation where so-and-so had the copy and everybody went over their house to listen to it?
Absolutely. Every time that somebody had an album, whatever it was, everybody was like lining up to copy to cassette tapes. But again, it was so easy to listen to American radio stations in Cuba that it was not necessary to have it on cassette. I mean, people had it on cassettes if you wanted to listen to, a whole album of, Billy Joel, The Stranger, or 52nd Street. If you want to have the whole album, yes, you could copy that on cassette tapes.
Yeah.
In my case, I didn't need to because I had a friend who was a steward at the time, and he traveled a lot to England, and he brought a lot of albums, the Beatles, which it's my number one band.
Yeah.
And I copied all those, Beatles albums on cassette tapes, or any other artist like Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin or Queen, which I followed even more than Billy Joel at the time. Yeah, it was a bootleg industry in Cuba. Not that you sold it, but it was, copied hand to hand from one friend to another, or going to a party on a weekend, and somebody saying, hey, they're gonna play. Somebody has this album, and they're gonna play the whole album at the party. So everybody who was a big fan of that band went to the party, to listen to the whole album.
Yeah,
just one song after the other. There are many interesting stories about I interviewed Liberty told me interesting things like him giving a T-shirt or throwing cigarettes over the balconies to the Cubans. We're talking about a third world country. Where like T-shirts or jeans were not a common thing in late 79.
No.
He has this memory of him throwing over the balcony cigarettes or little things, chocolates, to the children or to the kids. They were not children, to the kids or the young people who were waiting for these Americans to give us some presents, and gave him a shirt to a guy who then he learned later on that the guy had been arrested. And then they had to wear the T-shirt, in reverse, so they couldn't see what the shirt said. They were crazy days. They were crazy days.
The one takeaway, he always talked about how great the people were there, that just how grateful they were that, they were coming to play music. And he said it really helped put things in perspective. Anytime I was complaining about something, he's like, this was truly special to get to do this. And I think everyone involved was so glad they got to take part.
The documentary tells it all. I mean, the documentary in Russia.
Oh, Bridge to Russia. Yeah.
A Matter of Trust. Yeah.
When I watched it, I said, this was the same thing. This is exactly what happened in Cuba. Exactly the same. A few years later, Russia got rid of that prohibition before Cuba. But we're talking a few years later, and you could see that the people's reaction was absolutely amazing. And Billy Joel told me that when he played in Cuba, he didn't notice any difference in the audience reaction from any of his shows in the United States. It was exactly the same reaction. And in the tape, you can hear people listening.
Yep.
You can hear people shouting, "Piano Man, Piano Man," or "Rosalinda's Eyes." You can see people saying, and I said, "Why didn't you play Piano Man?" I asked him. And he said, because I think it was too soft. We wanted to play something as rocky as possible. We wanted to rock the Karl Marx Theater. And he did something similar to what he did in Russia, only that he didn't go off stage to bring people who were standing in the back and brought them to the stage or near the stage. In Cuba, he just called them from the stage. And the guys, the Cubans were, they approached the stage. And he high-fived, with them, and that they were. He says that there was security with machine guns, military guys. This is something that only Billy Joel remembers. I asked a lot of people, and nobody remembers that there were military personnel with machine guns. You cannot cross. this line.
Right.
I was curious, you had mentioned that when you started the documentary, you were a journalist and you borrowed a camera. Did you have any experience in film prior to starting this project?
Yes. I was a producer in Cuba for crews that from the States or from England. I graduated as an English teacher in 1985. And since then, I worked as a translator. I double as a translator and as an English professor. So at a point, I decided to quit teaching, started working as a freelance producer, film producer. So I had experience filming and, doing interviews and working for documentaries. I had that experience. This is a project that started as a labor of love. It was only my wife and myself carrying one camera, one very heavy tripod, lights, and it was a hard time. I had a car. Thankfully, I had a car at the time, so I could move around Havana. Organize. And the first thing we did was organize who could tell me a good story. Of course, the musicians had a good story to tell, and then who of the organizers had a good story to tell. I found all the organizers from the Cuban Ministry of Culture, and they told me very good stories, and people from the audience and musicians who didn't play, but they were able to tell me their perspective as musicians of what they were hearing and seeing at the festival.
Mm-hmm.
Columbia Records brought to Cuba all their gear, everything. They brought every single little detail, all the microphones, all the sound desks, everything. Speakers, monitors. They brought everything. Lights. Cuba didn't have to put anything but the stage, just the stage,
just the room.
Right, and the venue. And so they hired a Showco to hire all the equipment. Showco brought the technical part, and they also hired like pianos. And I think Billy Joel didn't play his own piano. I think the piano. I don't remember, it was Billy's, but they hired a lot of equipment.
Yeah.
For the show.
Yeah.
Remember that we are talking about different bands from Weather Report, including Jaco Pastorius. We're talking about John McLaughlin, who even though he was English, he was part of the Columbia roster, and he was living in the States at the time. We are talking about the Jazz All-Stars. All the jazzers were under the Columbia roster, and that demands equipment. All these sax players and trombone players and trumpet players and all that. And they brought pianos, and they brought everything. So it was
Wow.
when my Cuban friends were knowledgeable about sound, when the first act was Weather Report, playing like Weather Report played, and with lights and smoke. It was the first time that Cuba had ever seen dry ice, the smoke that comes off the stage. And then it just went down the stairs and into the first line in the audience. And when people started seeing the smoke, people started to panic. They thought that the venue was in fire, and some of them ran. Liberty can tell you about this. Liberty told me a very nice story about this. And so it was out of the best equipment and the best sound at the time in a third world country.
Right.
So everybody was like, "What the heck is this?" Even the Cuban musicians, who didn't expect to be heard so well, they sounded good. But you know what? Everybody learned from everybody, because for example, the U.S. drummers were dying to meet the Cuban drummers, percussionists.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
And the Cuban guitarists were crazy to meet the American guitarists. And Billy Joel told me that this was the first time and the only time he shared the stage with people he would never imagine he would see on stage. He said, "I shared the stage, which not sharing and playing together, but we shared the same stage for 3 days with people I would never imagine I would even see in the United States." And they were there. Stan Getz, you name it. It's all these big jazz stars. It's crazy. Yeah. It was like one American, one Cuban, one American, one Cuban, 4 different acts every day. So they started with Weather Report, then one Cuban, then another Cuban, and then Fania All Stars. And then the second day, one American, one Cuban, one American, one Cuban. They closed with Ira Carey. And the third day, one Cuban, Rita Coolidge and Chris Christopherson, then a Cuban act, and then Billy Joel.
Wow.
That's the way they did it.
Wow.
The shows were supposed to last tops 3 hours, but they lasted sometimes 5 hours. And the shows finished very late at night. I mean, very early in the morning because they finished at 2 a.m.
So they weren't daytime shows. They weren't slated like noon to 5.
No, they were at night. They were supposed to start at 8:30, but they didn't start at 8:30. You know, there's always technical problems, especially in Cuba. The preparation between one set and the other, because you have to disassemble one stage and then another stage for the next act, and it was a complicated process. So the shows went longer than expected. Billy Joel was the last act, and everybody was waiting for him. And even though he started late, everybody stayed in the venue to see Billy Joel.
It's so amazing that there was this, huge event, and it's so underreported, and the footage is out there too, and you've got it, and that's so awesome that at least somebody's trying to shepherd this.
The funny thing is that I didn't know that Billy Joel was in Cuba until years later. I knew that Jaco Pastorius was there because a friend told me he played bass, and he says, I just went to see a guy who played bass like the Angels, and he didn't know the name, but he just mentioned the guy, and that's it. It was not, the Cuban media didn't follow the event. They didn't promote the event because it was an invitation only event. It was closed doors event. The Karl Marx Theater has a capacity for about almost 5,000 people, and they didn't sell the tickets. They just sent invitations to members of the Communist Party. Remember, we're talking about American musicians in the 1979. American music was still considered too decadent and too capitalist for the formation of the Cuban, the values of the Cuban youth, that they wanted to form this communist, mentality. And American music, especially rock and jazz, were considered too capitalist for the likes of the Cuban people. So they didn't promote the event. Only a minor little square in the main Communist Party newspapers, and that was it. And they invited the ministers, the top members of the Communist Party. The good thing about this is that these people didn't know who were playing, so they gave the invitations to their children, and sometimes their children gave the invitations to their friends. So that's why many of the people who went were not members of the Communist Party or the parents. The tickets were gotten through a friend of a friend, or the aunt who was given in her office. She was given a ticket and says, there is an event and I don't want to go. You want to go? And then she gave the ticket to her nephew, and that's how people went. But it was mostly aimed at the members of the Communist Party. They wanted to keep it in closed doors just in case. And also they believed at the time that Castro was going to attend. Again, remember that I'm still surprised why the Havana Jam took place, because of the mentality of the time. There was something called ideological diversion in Cuba. And that was the worst thing that you could hear. If somebody like your teacher or the principal of your school or the police or somebody from the Communist Party told you that they were diverted ideologically, that was a very bad thing. You could go to jail for that. If you listen to American radio stations and the police caught you could go to jail. Literally, you could go to jail.
Yeah.
So this happened, even though American music was not banned anymore as it had been in the 60s and early 70s. American music was still considered a bad influence.
Yeah.
Because of drugs, because of long hair. Castro didn't like in 1963, Castro gave a speech at the University of Havana, and he said something bad against youth with long hair and guitars. He says that they were considered too feminine for the formation of the Cuban man. From that day on, remember, this is 13th of March, 1963. The next day, there was a huge witch hunt against everybody with long hair, guitars, especially people who like unfollowed rock. And in the same sack, in the same bag, they put homosexuals, who had long hair or were too weak, and they were not strong men for the formation of the Cuban, society. So everybody with long hair, anybody with a guitar, was bad. For many years, even until the early 80s. And then they started to open up. Rock bands, they didn't have any promotion in Cuba. Rock bands were underground bands. Underground. They could only play in parties, friends parties, but never in public. They never had a space to play, openly on stage, on a Cuban stage.
With a lot of that mentality carrying over even into the 80s, like you said, it's surprising in a lot of ways that this concert happened at all.
I'm still surprised why Castro allowed the concert to happen. But again, they try to keep it in closed doors. Mm-hmm. It happened, but nowadays you ask people my age, and they said, "Did Billy Joel ever played in Cuba? Are you serious that he played in Cuba?" Not many people nowadays, 4 years later, know that Billy Joel played in Cuba.
Right.
Not many people know that this happened. Right. Not many people know that. When I did my trailer for back in 2009, and I put it on the internet, people were telling me that, did that happen in Cuba? I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. Billy Joel came. I didn't know that.
It's certainly an incredibly monumental thing, him going there in his career. But, the contrast of how the Russian tour was done, granted that was 6 concerts, but that was so heavily documented by his team, by every American news outlet. It was so heavily covered at the time that even though there were so many parallels, it almost is like Havana Jam, just, because of the lack of coverage about it.
Remember that the Russia concerts, because there were several, happened a few years later after the Havana Jam. But the mentality, and even though I told you before, even though the Russian mentality opened up before it did in Cuba, you remember, don't light my audience. Why? Because every time that they put lights on the audience, everybody got quiet because they were afraid. That mentality you cannot erase overnight. So even though Billy Joel had been officially invited, or he was officially playing in Moscow or Leningrad, wherever he played, the people wanted to go, but they didn't want the other people to know that you were enjoying the show. So in the dark, everybody was happy. Under a spotlight, everybody froze. And you know that he raised hell.
Yep.
Yeah, we've seen it.
He kicked the piano and he raised hell. He didn't like it. Because the mentality in Russia, in Cuba, in Czechoslovakia, in Bulgaria, in all those socialist countries, we have been so repressed for years. We have been under so much repression and persecution, and that you cannot erase that overnight. When I came to this country in 2011, and sometimes I talked against the Cuban government to my wife, I would whisper in her ear whatever I was going to say, and all of a sudden I said, why am I whispering? I'm in the United States. I can say whatever I want. But that mentality, it's already, it's in your veins. You cannot erase it.
I'm curious, and this may not be a question that has a quick, easy answer. It's easy, for us as Americans to think of it as, okay, there was an oppressive government and then everybody underneath was oppressed. But then, you say something like, Castro says the long hair and the guitars are no good. Next thing you know, there's a witch hunt. When it came to your average citizen, what was the mentality like? Was there like a split between communists sort of on the block in your neighborhood versus the people that were anti-communist or just didn't like it? Was it a real split between just the government and the people, or were there people, regular citizens with that mentality as well? Because I'm guessing that's who's going to rat you out, right? It's going to be your neighbor. It's not going to be a cop.
Yeah. Castro was one of the smartest guys ever.
Mm-hmm.
He was able to get into the mentality of the people. And then before Castro, there was another dictatorship, the Batista regime. Batista was a guy who his police could go to your house and shoot you in the head in front of your family, just like that, and nothing happened. He overthrew Batista. Castro, what he did, he went mountains, he became a guerrilla guy. He came back, he went to Mexico. He just gathered a bunch of guerrilla guys. He raised money, he bought guns, and he came back to Cuba to start a revolution. And then everybody was saying, all right, Castro is going to change this government. So when he took power in January 1959, he promised that he was going to, bring a socialist revolution where everybody was going to have the same rights, where there was going to be no discrimination. The black people could go to hotels, and the blacks and the whites could share, whatever. And people like that because it was a beautiful idea that this guy is going to change all the suffering that we have had for so many years. But he started, introducing, evil. And people will still say, oh, yeah, but, it's Castro. He's saying that he's going to, for example, the rice, Cuban families, they buy food with a ration card. They give you a ration card. And in that ration card, that has changed a little bit in the last few years. But back in my day, they would give my father a ration card. And in that ration card, you would be given, for example, 5 pounds of rice for the month and 2 pounds of sugar and 1 pound of black beans, a couple of beefsteaks or some, ground beef. And that's it. You couldn't buy, apart from that, if you ran out of those supplies, you couldn't buy them again because that you were supposed to get, from the government. Subsidized. That is true. Very cheap.
Right.
But he didn't give you any other means to buy more. So then he started decreasing the amount of sugar and the amount of rice, and people started, adapting to that because he was so clever that he started, cutting things that he had promised. And at a point he said, I don't remember what year, he said, in a couple of years, we are going to have more family incomes than in any capitalist country, including the United States. And people said, oh, Castro is promising that we're going to get better salaries than in the United States. It never happened. There were people, communists in Cuba, people were more Castro followers than communists in the whole sense of the word. They followed Castro blindly, like an icon, like a god. So whatever he said, people said, oh, Castro said that. So people followed him. So whatever crazy idea he had, people supported it because it was Castro saying that. So there were some people that in 1959, they were their properties were seized. It didn't matter if you were a millionaire and you had a huge mansion, they would come and take it away from you. If you had a factory or if you had a car dealer, a car dealership, they would come and seize it from you, and they said, no, now this belongs to the people. And many people lost their businesses. Even if you had a little store, even though if you were a farmer who worked hard for 10 years and you were able to raise some money and buy a little grocery store in the corner of this town or city. Overnight, Castro came with his guerrilla guys, with militia guys, and said, from now on, this is not your store anymore. This store belongs to the people. So there were those people who, from the very beginning, people started going against Castro because he was damaging their economy. But the majority followed Castro blindly, like my parents. So I was raised with a mentality that I had to accept everything that came from Castro. For many years, I believed that, until I became a teenager and, I became older, and I started saying, but this is not what I heard he had promised. And like me, many people started thinking the same. Why he doesn't let me listen to the Beatles? If the Beatles are not saying anything against Castro, the Beatles are singing boy loves girl, girl loves boy songs, or I love you, you love me. What's wrong with this picture? Yeah. So many people starting to realize that there was something wrong. The old people continued following, like my parents continued following Castro's ideals, but not many people didn't. So there was like a kind of, a fraction between those following him blindly and those who didn't like what was going on. And there was the other side that were totally against what was going on in Cuba. Against it. They didn't want to know anything about communism. In my case, I was not on that far right side. I was simply saying, but I want to listen to rock music. Why I cannot do it? Or I want to have jeans. Why I cannot go to a store and buy jeans? Or I want to stay in a hotel. Why I cannot stay in a hotel? So Castro prohibited that Cubans could stay in hotels. Can you believe that? Hotels were only for foreigners, not for Cubans. Any foreigner in Cuba has more rights today than any Cuban national. We lost our rights. And after Castro passed away, the government was passed like this is a monarchy from Castro to his brother. There were no elections to vote for Raúl. It was just from now on, my brother is taking power. And when Raúl Castro decided to leave power, he just appointed another guy. There were no elections, like a monarchy. Yeah. So nowadays there are many people, like, I don't know whether you've seen, there have been many protests on the streets, like that people don't like what's going on. There is a lot of scarcity. My brother died about a month ago of COVID in the hospital. Cuba has always boasted to be a health power, a medical power. We can send doctors anywhere in the world to save people. And they are not able to save their own people in Cuba. And my brother died. He got COVID. He went to the hospital, and they didn't have oxygen to give him for 2 days. And my brother choked to death because he couldn't breathe.
That's so horrible. I'm so sorry.
This is happening. This is happening now in Cuba.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, this has nothing to do with the Havana Jam or Billy Joel.
You know, just like rock and roll came to you, this is a window we've never had before. There is something beautiful about the interview with Billy Joel. The first time I interviewed him, I told you it was on audio. The second time it was on camera. My son was studying Loyola University at the time. Violin. He started studying violin back in Cuba when he was a little kid. Yeah. I mean, in Cuba musicians are so good. Well, first of all, because it's in our blood, we are a mix between Spain and Africa, and we have the music from both sides,
Yeah.
But my son started playing the violin when he was like 6 years old. And then he went to music school. And in Cuba, the music schools, it's full time. So you go in the morning, and if you're studying violin, my son started playing in the school when he was in 3rd grade, let's say 8 years old, but he started privately 2 years before. He has violin lessons and piano lessons and music theory the whole morning. And then the whole afternoon, it's math, geography, sciences, that sort of thing. It's every day. So my son started playing the violin when he was a little kid. So I told my son when I was going to do the second interview, he was studying at Loyola University at the time. He was in the second year, I think. And I told him, listen, we are going to interview Billy Joel, so you bring your violin that day. No, he was 19 years old. He says, why am I going to bring my violin to the Billy Joel interview? And I said, listen to your dad. Bring your violin to the Billy Joel interview. I'm not going to bring the violin to Billy. I said, you are going to bring the violin to the judge. Well, I convinced him to bring the violin. I flew him from New Orleans to Miami, and we drove all the way to West Palm Beach. When we got out of the car, Billy Joel saw the violin and says, oh, you play the violin. And I told him, I told you. So he says, all right, let's do the interview with your dad. And after the interview, I want to hear you play. And my son said, okay.
Oh, that's amazing.
So we did the interview. When we finished, Billy Joel lights a cigarette and he tells, all right, show me what you got. My son gets a violin, starts playing Cuba music, and Billy Joel is smoking his cigarette. And he said, hey, Alexis, is Della Rose sleeping? She was 6 months old at the time, Della Rose. No, she's awake. Can I go and play with Danny in the piano in the living room? And says, yeah, go ahead. So they go there and start jamming.
Oh, wow.
Billy Joel sat on the piano, starts playing Cuban music, like the Peanut Vendor and different Cuban songs, And my son starts playing, following up, and oh yeah, good. And okay, and let's play this. And there's a part that says, do you know the Peanut Vendor, Billy? And he says, what? I said, the Peanut Vendor. It's a Cuban song from the 30s. Do you know? I says, no. And my son plays, and Billy Joel starts playing piano like he was the writer of the song.
Oh my God.
And he plays the song like he was the author of the song. And my son starts playing and he says, oh yeah, good. And what else can he play? Do you know any rock and roll? And my son says, yeah, sure. All right, let's play. And then he starts playing rock and roll. My son follows. And do you know any jazz? And my son says, well, I live in New Orleans, so let's play some jazz. Billy Joel plays jazz. And any classical music? And my son says, well, I'm a classical music trained musician, so everything I played is classical. How about this? And he starts playing, I don't remember what song, and my son follows. And my son says, do you know this Tchaikovsky song, the piece? And he says, yeah, sure. And they start playing all this like they have been jamming for years.
Wow.
And he says, oh my gosh. Wow, Danny, do you know any of my songs? And my son says, no. He says, no, I don't know any of your songs. I know your name because my father has mentioned your name many times, but I don't know any of your songs. And he says, there is a song called the Downister Alexa that has a piano that was played originally by Isaac Perlman. And it has a piano part. And it goes like this. And then he starts playing Gaga, and my son starts following with the Downister Alexa. And he stands up from the piano and says, hey, Danny, listen, this is January 2016. Mm-hmm. Danny, would you like to play with me at the Madison Square Garden next month? Oh. And we go like, what? He says, yes, I have a show in February at the Madison Square Garden. Would you like to play with me? And my son says, yeah, what do I have to do? And says, tell me yes. And my son says, yes. And he says, okay, since you don't know any of my songs, I'm going to give you the album, and you look for the song called the Downister Alexa. I want you to play that song. You do the violin part like Isaac Perlman. You do that. And I'll see you next month. And I said, what? He says, yeah, I'll see you. You're good. You're good. So you're going to play with me next month. My son is only 18 years old, maybe 19 years old. We go home. We go like crazy. Was this a dream? What the heck is this? Is this real? Is he pulling our leg? And we flew our son back to New Orleans. And a few days later, I call him and say, hey, Billy, listen, the show, it's in a couple of weeks, and you haven't rehearsed with Danny. And he says, Danny's a professional. We don't rehearse. So we only do sound check, tell him to be on time. It was the day before my birthday. It was the 13th of February, 2016. My birthday was the 14th of February for Valentine's Day. So you'll be on time at 4:00 at the venue on the side door. Your name is going to be there. You'll be on time. You do sound check, and we do the show. And that's what happened. That day we flew to New York. We arrived at the venue, and he's already doing sound check with the guys playing. I don't remember which song. I have everything. I have it on video. And he said, "Hey, where's Danny? Is Danny here? Yeah, here. I'm here." So Danny's already. They're already putting the mic on the violin, miking the violin and him, and putting the reference headphones. And he said, all right, Danny, jump on stage. He introduced him to the rest of the band. And he said, oh, this is Danny. He plays well. He's going to play with us, the Downister Alexa. All right, let's do the sound check. And then they do one take. And Danny was so excited that he was playing like he was Mozart. And he said, all right, how was it? And then he asked, I don't remember the name of the sound guy, his sound recordist.
Brian Ruggles.
Oh, Brian Ruggles.
He says, hey, Brian, how was it? And Brian said, it's too much violin. And he says, Danny, this is not your song. This is the Downister Alexa. You're playing just a little part with a little solo, but this is not your song, all right? So you have to play less violin. So Danny plays less violin, and he says, all right, see you later. See you at the show. So we go backstage to the dressing room, and they gave him the set list, and you're number 8, and you come after the song, like 3 songs before, you come to the side of the stage, and you join us. And when I call you, you come on stage. And that's what happened. He called Danny. I don't know whether you've seen that. It's in my YouTube channel, or you can probably Google Danny Juan, Billy Joel, the Downister Alexa, and you will see a couple of videos recorded from different angles.
Yeah.
So Danny played the Downister Alexa that day, and it was incredible. Like he was part of the band.
I'm going to invite a young man on stage. He's a very talented musician, and I asked him to come and join us here at the Garden tonight. He came all the way up from New Orleans to play this song with us. And I want to welcome Danny Juan.
Woohoo! Danny!
That's just a great story.
How cool.
Yeah. And after that, we remained friends. Yeah, Billy Joel it's a great guy, very great guy, very humane. If you get to know him personally, like you go to his house and he buys pizza, he orders pizza, and then we are in the kitchen eating pizza, and you don't grab your plate and you're eating the pizza, and he says, "Hey, why don't you grab the plate? You're dropping pizza on the floor."
Right.
And things like that. It's a cool guy, very cool guy. He invited Danny to see Isaac Perman play at a venue in West Palm Beach like a few months later.
Mhm.
So he introduced
Oh, wow.
Danny to Isaac, and we had a good time. Sometimes you have this these beautiful things that happen in your life and you say, I don't deserve this, but God gives you those opportunities. A Cuban guy for the first time, a teenager playing with Billy Joel at the Madison Square Garden, where there are so many professional musicians who are dying to play, not with Billy Joel, to play at the Madison Square Garden. And all of a sudden, Billy Joel is playing with my son, and a 19-year-old guy from Cuba, playing the Down East Alexa. Incredible. And I have to thank that. I have to give, to the Havana Jam and me doing the documentary. If I didn't interview Billy Joel, my son would have never played with Billy.
One thing that stuck out to me too, of you telling the story of, the first time when you two were having lunch, he's like, let's eat and just chat. We'll talk later. He wanted to get to know you before you guys really dug into it. So that was such a nice little anecdote that just kind of went by in passing. But I like the fact that he just wanted to be very personable and just get to know each other.
It was just the three of us. We could have kidnapped him. We could have killed him. We could have done anything to him because it was just him, his two dogs, and my wife and myself, just talking in his back, in his backyard, and on the terrace he has on the back of the house, just enjoying the beach and having a nice chat. And he was smoking a cigar, and I said, "Hey, what cigar is that?" And he said, "This cigar is Canadian." And I said, "Billy Joel, that's sacrilege to tell a Cuban that you're smoking a Canadian cigar. Come on, do you have any Cuban cigars?" And he says, "No, I don't have any." And I said, "Next time I go to Cuba, I'm gonna bring you a couple of boxes," which I did. I went to Cuba and I bought in like 5 different boxes, and he has a humidor, and he says, "Hey, I'm gonna keep them in the humidor. They're gonna last for a while."
Yeah.
A few months later, or maybe a couple of years later, I said, "Billy, I'm going back to Cuba. You want more cigars?" He says, "No, I have enough." So he's keeping them, he's smoking one, he's taking his time, you enjoying the real thing. After smoking so many Canadian cigars, you have to enjoy a Cuban cigar and make it last.
Right.
Let's talk about the documentary a little. You had put out some announcements about it. What's the status of it right now, and what needs to happen to bring it to fruition?
Well, like I said, it started as a labor of love. I didn't want to get anything for this, but when I came here, again, the first interview I did I made in this country was Billy Joel. The first American act I interviewed was Billy Joel. What a better start do I need?
Yeah.
After that, I started saying, I am a Cuban filmmaker. I'm doing a documentary about the Havana Jam, and I'd love to interview you. I know that you played in Havana with this band, and they asked, who else have you interviewed? And I said, Billy Joel. So they said, all right, if this guy interviewed Billy Joel, it means that this is serious. So they have all told me yes. So I have interviewed almost everybody now from the different bands, from Chris Christopherson's band, from Stephen Steele's band, from Billy Joel's band, with the exception of Doc, who sadly, is no longer with us. Everybody from a lot of people from the Funny All-Stars, and a lot of from Weather Report. There is only Peter Erskine and Wayne Shorter. Wayne Shorter is very old now, and I don't think he's going to give me an interview. So I have interviewed Rita Coolidge. I did interview. So I have interviewed almost everybody. All this production has been sponsored by myself, which means a lot of money.
Right.
I had to fly to Monaco in the south of France to interview John McLaughlin for 1 hour. I had to fly for 1 hour for 1 hour interview. Of course, I enjoyed Paris and I enjoyed. Then I went to Rome, and but I did this interview. I flew. I think I made a trip for about 4 or 5 days, but just 1 hour was to interview John McLaughlin. I opened a fundraising campaign, but I could only raise $1,900.
Wow.
$1,900 didn't even cover my airfare to Monaco.
Yeah.
So I'm in the process now that I don't have any more. I don't want to spend any more money from my pocket, so I'm looking for sponsors. Maybe an executive producer, a production company who would be interested in helping me finish the documentary. I have a few more interviews to shoot, probably 5 more interviews to shoot with people that can give me good stories, and then the edit, and then just find a distributor and distribute the film.
Yeah.
When I started doing this in Cuba, the Ministry of Culture gave me all their photo archives. They gave me about 1,000 different slides, photos that they took, Cuban photographers, and so I have a lot of photos from all the different acts. When I got here, I got in touch with Sony, and they gave me, access to the photo archives of Havana Jam, and I have all those photos as well. In terms of photos, I have a lot. I got in touch with some of the Columbia Records organizers, Bill Freston, who was Bruce Lumbaugh's right-hand man at the time. He gave me all the CBS archives, all the communication with Cuba, all the photos they took in all the different trips they made from 1978 to 1979. He gave me access to everything related to the Havana Jam that he had from CBS.
Yeah.
Then I got in touch with another lady who was also one of the CBS organizers, also very close to Bruce Lumbaugh, and she gave me hundreds of photos from the Havana Jam. I got in touch with photographers who were part of the Havana Jam. They gave me all their files as well. And then I found I have access. I interviewed James Lipton, who also passed like 2 years ago, and he gave me also a bunch of photos that he took because he was going to be the producer of the documentary that they were supposed to sell to U.S. TV stations. And he gave me, and Sony gave me a lot of footage of the event. Some of the different acts playing, on stage, backstage footage. I have a lot of very interesting material. Only that Billy Joel is not included in any of that footage. There is no visual evidence on video of Billy Joel ever being in Cuba.
Are there any other photographs besides the one that was on People magazine?
There are thousands of photographs.
Oh, they have the photographs, just not the video. Okay.
Sony has a lot of photos, and I have a lot of photos that Sony doesn't have.
Okay.
Billy Joel at the beach. I have published, if you go to my Facebook page, Havana Jam 79, you will see that there are many photos. If you go there and then you look for photos, you will see a lot of photos of Billy Joel at the beach. There is one very good photo of there is a human pyramid where with the band and roadies and friends. It's a pyramid. I have everything. The only thing I need is money to finish it.
Yeah.
This costs money. It's a production, and even though I started doing it with my wife, now I need support. I cannot move on my own. This costs money, and I don't have that money.
We certainly have listeners scattered throughout the world, and we don't know the demographics of anyone who may be in a position to help get you to that next level. But if there was somebody listening who would be interested in learning more about how they can help and assist, financially or otherwise, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
They can either go to my webpage, zudanproductions.com. They can get in touch with me through the Facebook page, Havana Jam Facebook page. I have a page called Havana Jam 79, and I have a group page called Havana Jam Appreciation Society. This is a very interesting story. We are talking about one of the most historical music events that has ever happened. It was the first time in 20 years that Cuba and the United States shook hands. Many of the musicians that took part of the event told me that Havana was a change of their lives. Liberty DeVito told me that, and you can hear him say that in my trailer. He says every time they ask him which is the highlight of your career with Billy, he says Havana, Cuba, the Havana Jam, because it was an event where Americans would never think that they would go to Cuba and enjoy a weekend at the beach, drinking rum or enjoying Cuban music or sharing the stage with all these musicians. The Havana Jam is a very historical event. I have so many interesting stories from people who are no longer with us. I started doing this documentary 12 years ago. And probably about 9-10 people that I interviewed are already dead. They died after I interviewed them, which makes their interviews even more interesting because they are no longer with us. They cannot tell the story anymore. Billy says why there is no audio. He says it. So everybody wants to know why there is no audio or video. Just listen directly from the mouth of the horse.
And we've also gathered over the years in talking with various band members and crew that, for better or worse, Elizabeth had a very tight lid on anything being filmed and recorded throughout her tenure managing Billy. So in a lot of ways, it benefited him, but there was clearly certain aspects like this where, in hindsight, it certainly seems like that wasn't the best decision.
Elizabeth made a decision and Billy Joel didn't like it. I have to agree with her in the end because we didn't go to Cuba for a capitalist venture. I was told that we were going to Cuba to play for the Cuban people. I didn't go to Cuba to make money. And nobody's going to make money from my music, if that is what I was told initially. But this was going to be a cultural event, a music exchange, not a capitalist venture. But then he says, well, she shouldn't have pulled the plug. She should have allowed them to film. And then later on, once we have the recording and once we have the video, we can make a decision, in the office. But now there is nothing. There is no evidence of me in Cuba. Yeah. It's gone.
Now
there
you
is
can't
nothing.
even... Yeah.
But then I said, yes, there is something, Billy. I have that recording. And he says, no, you don't have that recording. I says, I have the recording. I have it. That's why I know that you didn't start with Big Shot.
I want to thank you so much. This has been such an amazing interview. We were excited just to hear about this show. But, talking with you has been such a pleasure. And so we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Guys, thank you very much for your time, for your, it's a privilege for me to be part of this because it's you guys are doing a great job. I have listened to a couple of your shows. I didn't know that they existed. If anybody out there can help me, finish this movie, this is not about Billy Joel. This is about a cultural exchange between Cuba and the United States in 1979. That most of the musicians that took part of the event considered probably the highlights of their career. Mm-hmm. It's a historical event. It's about something that really it's interesting, not because of what happened, but because of what still has outlasted through all these years. People still remembering 40 years later. Oh yeah, Cuba was great. The Cuban people were absolutely amazing. Rita Coolidge told me. I was playing in Los Angeles, like everybody knew my songs. There was a radio station. There were a couple of radio stations that we could pick up, in Havana or in Cuba, very clearly. And yes, I will really appreciate it if anybody wants to get in touch with me. This is for the fans who want to hear what happened or want to see what happened. What happened to their idols, music idols, like those followers of Weather Report. Or the followers of Jaco Pastorius. I have so many interesting stories from Jaco Pastorius that I'm pretty sure that none of them have ever heard. Told by Peter Erskine, told by people who saw Jaco Pastorius crying every night in Havana because he felt sad. Jaco Pastorius had the Havana Jam was the point where Jaco Pastorius started acting crazy. He was bipolar, and Havana was the spark that that set off the crazy things he did later. Mm-hmm. Well, for those Billy Joel's fans who are listening now, Billy Joel told me in this interview things that I'm pretty sure you have never heard. I'm looking for a production company who can help me finish this movie. Since it's a music documentary, there are issues that we have to cover financially, which is copyright, and that's not cheap. And then distribution. For 12 years, it's been a labor of love. I need help from a serious production company who can let me, put an end to this.
What a great conversation. Once again, I learned so much more than I ever thought I would. Not only this concert, but the relations between Cuba and America and the political and personal climate among the Cubans and just what things were like during that time frame. To hear from somebody from there who had a chance to speak with and go through all of this footage and documents surrounding this historic event.
You know, we make a point of staying apolitical on this podcast. It's a very conscious effort on our part, but there's no denying that we live in very harsh and very political, divisive times right now. And I think it takes a toll on everyone. One thing that I found that brings me comfort is reading up on history. You know, what I get from that is the solace of knowing that, you know, we're not in this alone. We're not the first generation to go through these things. There is really something to getting to the humanity of it all, to getting an understanding of what happened and why. You know, as horrible as it was, sort of selfishly, gives you a wider perspective, and just having that knowledge, obtaining that knowledge without your own political agenda, you know, without trying to take in this information and make it fit your own ideology or what you want to think. Just really just sitting back and listening to someone else talk about their experiences when you know that their experiences are so different from yours. I really think it's the best antidote for a lot of the negative discourse that we see today. It's not going to cure everything by any means, but you know, when you're talking about just trying to make sense of what's going on, it's the best way to do it is just shut up and listen, man.
And that's why you heard a lot of that, because, you know, we had somebody coming from such a different background with such a different lens on the world that as soon as we started getting into that conversation, I knew there was a lot to be learned.
And that's a big reason why I really hope that this is the year for Ernesto to get this out there, because I think it's something everyone needs to see.
And that being said, we would love to see some support come Ernesto's way. Even if you can contribute $10 or $20, that certainly helps. Or if you know of anybody who's in a position to help invest on a larger scale and help bring this production to life, I think that's certainly a big thing that's needed at this stage in production, because he has done a lot of the legwork, and I think he needs somebody who can really help bring it on home. The best way to do that is, if you're somebody you know is in a position to help, is to reach out to him. His website is zudhanproductions.com. So it's ZUDHAN productions.com. And if you search that or his name, Ernesto Juan, on Instagram, on Facebook, and then also there is a Havana Jam 79 Facebook page and group that has a lot of great photos and stories about this event and this concert that he has collected already. So we would really love to see this come to fruition, and please reach out to him if you are in a position at all to help.
Thanks everybody for listening. We hope you found this story as insightful and inspiring as we did, and we'll see you next time.
We'll see you soon, everyone. Thanks so much.
Crazy Latin dancing solo down in Herald Square. Oh, Havana, I've been searching for you everywhere.